Okay, some of you have heard all this, but this is the tour of the Capitol, highlighting the workers and contractors who built this building between 1896 and 1907. We're not going to spend a lot of time out here because it's so cold, but there are some things that you can only see from here. I'm going to pass around a few photographs here, and then I'm going to turn it over to Dave, who is one of the primary researchers on it. Just so you know, there's a wide shot and a close-up that gives you some idea about the techniques of the Capitol. You'll see a house with a steam engine. You'll see they were mostly using horses. You'll see billboards and a shot here. I'll start passing these around after you're done. So, Dave, you want to talk a little bit about the stone controversy and John Geary?
Well, you see the building, it's mostly made of Georgia marble. That's what Cass Gilbert wanted. There's no marble quarried in Minnesota, and the stoneworkers unions and their employers wanted to build the Capitol out of Minnesota granite. So you can see who won. It's somewhat of a compromise. The top 4/5 is Georgia marble, and the bottom is Minnesota granite. The chain of human activity to build the Capitol, of course, starts all the way back at the quarries where the stone comes from, and then up to the Capitol. The Georgia marble came up on the Chicago Great Western Railroad, and then was hauled by Teamsters, a horse and wagon, from the depot at river level up to the Capitol, which is about a 90-foot elevation. So gives you an idea of the amount of energy that had to be expended just to transport it up here. It wasn't until the 1920s that that motor trucks could haul more than a horse and a wagon. So back in the 1890s, early 1900s, this was the way that things came up here. Here's a nice shot of hauling a block of Georgia marble down Wabasha Street, up Wabasha Street to the Capitol. First thing you have to do with a building like this is dig a hole in the ground. That took Teamsters to be part of the excavation and haul the dirt away, and then after that they were involved with transporting building materials up to the Capitol. We found in the payroll records that one of the Teamsters who was employed on the Capitol, John Geary from St. Paul, was a notable union leader for many years. He was an international vice president of the Teamsters Union for almost 40 years till he died in 1942. And one of the founders of Teamsters Local 120, which is still in existence there. At the time it was founded, it was a team owners union. The team owners sold their services and their horses' services to employers. So John Geary kind of ranks high in the pantheon of union leaders who came out of this state. And early in his career as a worker, he was employed here. This is just pass this around. Also a photo of his grave at Calvary. We've been trying to find if there are any living descendants, but so far we haven't succeeded. And I'll pass this around. This is a cartoon relating to the controversy over what kind of stone.
I'll explain that in a second. Yeah,
was going to be used in the Capitol.
The other picture along with John Geary's grave, and then we'll go inside. A remarkable thing about this building, and I was videotaping the restoration of the dome, and you can still see that there's scaffolding here and on the other side. The supervising architect, Ginny Lakovic, said that today to build a structure like this, you would have 4 thick volumes of plans. They've only found 100 drawings for the whole Capitol. And she said a lot of them just say, build according to best current use. The point is that the workmen from the late 1800s to early 1900s who put this thing together virtually by hand, as you can see from that photograph, had incredible skill and experience. And so even a detail freak like Cass Gilbert, the architect, was willing to leave it in the hands of the workmen to design the stone and so forth as they saw fit based on their experience. What's even more remarkable is the dome you see rising above us. There were no plans for that. They did it by the seat of their pants. And there are only 4 domes, freestanding marble domes in the world. St. Peter's is the biggest. This is the second biggest in the world. The other 2 are the Taj Mahal and the Rhode Island State House. So, and one last thing, you see these marble statues? Those were designed by Daniel Chester French, and he gets the credit for it, but they were actually done by a whole team of stone cutters. They might have been the Ciccarelli brothers, who also did the Lincoln Memorial that he designed, but they eroded so badly that they were recarved in 1975.
These here were?
Yeah, these. They represent 6 virtues. And I would tell you about the virtues, but it's too cold. So, and I think the virtue is to get inside. So just meet me at the top of the steps, and we'll go inside and continue. This last piece was recarved in 1975 in Italy, in Pietrasanta. It totally eroded away, and they replaced that. You see the difference between that piece and what's around it? The marble is eroded pretty badly, as you can see. Okay, let's go ahead. Anybody that needs to, we even have a marble bench for you. All right, everyone in? Okay. We know that there's a lot of things we don't know because the records of the primary contractors who built this, the Butler Ryan Company, they moved to Florida and disposed of most of their records. So there are only few records here at the Capitol, which is really a tragedy. We would know a lot more, and when we went into this, we thought we'd find out some more. This is William Butler, who is one of the Butler brothers. His house, by the way, is at the corner of Summit and Hamlin. His brother became a Supreme Court justice. If you have time, these are the commissioners and the architect Cass Gilbert. And here you can see in this picture an innovation of the Butler brothers, which was to use steam hoist. They had 2 tracks on either side of the Capitol that went back and forth and hoisted all this heavy stone up. And here you see a steam shovel. And the reason I'm pointing these out is that we are really lucky today to have Elaine Olson Ekstad and many other members of her family. Their great-great-grandfather operated a crane working on the Capitol. And so we're honored to have a descendant here, and so I'm going to turn over to her to tell us about her great-grandfather.
Well, let me point out the others. Linda's back by the door. Dale's right next to her. Linda's over here. Lee's right here. I think, is that all of us? There were 7 of us anyway. Our grandmother was kind of interested in history, so she left a lot of notes on things. And she told people a lot of things. And I'm going to send some pictures around too. This is a picture of Zebulon when he was younger. Picture of him with his wife, Zebulon, Ida, and Caroline. Zebulon was, let's see, how do we say this? Our grandfather's father. And a couple of the things that she left that are legendary in our family is this is a marble egg that was highly prized. And the story she told was that when Zebulon was involved in setting the stones at the state capitol, he picked up a scrap one day and took it home with him and fashioned it into an egg. And so this always had a place of prominence. And here's the note that goes with it. So The other thing, which I didn't bring with me today, but I will send a picture around, is there is a coin, a gold coin, not larger than a paper clip, and this is the copy of the little note she had stuck with it that said this was a $2.50 gold piece that he got paid as wages for working on the Capitol building. Obviously, the price much higher than that these days, so I'll send that around if you want to take a look at it. And then there's another picture here of one of the machinery. But some of the pictures that the one on the front of the brochure that you got, that came out of my grandmother's collection, out of Zebulon's book as well. So
Yeah, the brochure, as she was saying, for the whole Untold Stories
This
series
one here.
included. Yeah. Do you know which one is it? Can you tell?
I don't know. No.
But Zebulon is among those people, and wasn't that from the
Well, and Grandma's note on the back of that picture was groundbreaking group for state capital, St. Paul, Minnesota. Grandpa, and she put this on all her notes. Grandpa Zebulon set all the stones in the entire building, which so you have to take her historical notes with a little bucket of salt. But
What was the 250 gold piece? How much was that for a week or a day?
it was a day.
Okay.
A day's wages is what,
Yeah,
is what the
At
note
that
is.
time, when we get to the Rathskeller, I've got a couple copies of payroll sheets. When we're sitting down, it'll be easier to look at it, but the pay range something like 17 cents an hour for laborers up to maybe 50 cents for bricklayers, stone cutters, foremen, folks like that. So, yeah. Some people are only making $5 a week, but you have to multiply that by about 25 to get to current wages. Any other questions? Or all right. Well, what we're going to do is we're going to walk straight. We're going to walk into the rotunda for a moment and point out some paintings and a little bit about the design of the rotunda. So let's just walk in here. Can you all hear me? This is one of the most impressive parts of the Capitol, and as I said, this was a unique design, and it was built over some time. They were sort of figuring it out as they went. It's a complicated design. There are actually 3 domes. You're seeing one that's basically plaster and brick. It's just a few inches thick. Then there's a cone above that that's made with steel and has a waterproof coating, which they just replaced this summer because it was leaking. And then over that is the freestanding marble with a brick interior. And one picture I'd passed around before showed one of those interior domes. This is the design, and I'm also passing around another photograph, one of my favorites, of a mason when they were putting, you see there are these columns? These are made from stone Rockville and Ortonville granite, and they're just decorative. They don't actually support anything. But there's a photograph of them putting it into place here. Dave, did you want to talk a little bit about the painters? There are also a lot of paintings around here. And
Okay, I'll try to be audible. You see the murals up there? Cass Gilbert commissioned 6 famous muralists to create these, design them, and install them. The actual designers didn't do the painting. They hired journeyman painters to follow the design. There were maybe 25 of them, and they had some labor issues of their own with the boss painters, and of course their names aren't recorded in the history of the Capitol. Just the 6 prominent designers. So when you think about executing these murals, they were done in place. So these painters were hanging on scaffolding and filling this in. You know, they had to be quite skilled craftsmen to execute the design. And they were mostly members of the Painters Union, which didn't just include house painters and whitewashers. It included highly skilled people like that.
The chandelier that ordinarily hangs down from straight above us is right over there during the restoration. It's a rare opportunity to get close to it, so I thought we'd head over there. So we're just going to head over there. While you're walking by, I'm not going to spend time talking about it because we're kind of pressed for time, but these are other buildings that Cass Gilbert designed in Minnesota and across the country, so you might just glance at them as we pass by. I don't know if there's room for everyone to look at this, but just get a chance to see this. They had lights on it Wednesday for Capitol Day. You can sort of file by, but basically this is over 6 feet wide. They barely got it out of those chambers between those. It took several hours to get it out of there. I videotaped it actually. This was created in New York State by a company out in New York, and they think that the glass may be from Austria. But when the lights are on, it's pretty incredible. We can just kind of walk around here, I guess. And
There's no window on the other side.
no, I know it, so.
Get out of the way.
I'll say that Cass Gilbert was really into trying to get the latest technology into this building, and he wanted people to call this an electrolier, because chandelier comes from the French for candle, but it didn't catch on. We still call it a chandelier, so. But he was very proud of it, and he was trying to get everybody to call them electroliers.
What are they doing to it, Randy?
Well, they needed to take it out while they were restoring the inside of the rotunda, which is having a lot of problems with moisture that got in and was making the plaster and the murals collapse. And so they're in the process of refilling all the mortar and making replacements. They were doing that all summer. So it's just resting here until they finish that work. But it's pretty cool. Oh yeah, there are doors on it that they just took off so that you could see inside all the bulbs. Ordinarily there are two doors and it's completely covered with glass beads.
You say they're from
They're not sure. The company's in New York and it's gone out of business. It's another one of those cases where we can't find the records. We're going to have to try and go to New York and find out. But it looks like Australian crystal. But Austrian, not Australian. Our talk today, but if you have time, you can later look and read these. What's significant is one of the governors, Clough, who was governor during this period, actually signed legislation which took away the right of resident aliens who weren't citizens to vote. Until that, what year was that? You want to mention that quickly?
Well, that was in the original Minnesota Constitution, provided that not only citizens but resident aliens had the right to vote in state elections. So it just tells you things aren't always the way that, they weren't always the way they are today. A lot of the assumptions that people make today about, who's a legitimate member of society and who isn't were very different back then. Of course, you had a society that was 50% immigrant at that time. And just about Clough, and he was one of the three governors who was in office while the Capitol was being constructed. And in keeping with our labor theme here, you should know that after he left the governor's office, he went to Washington State and worked with his son-in-law. He was a lumber mill operator, and he was in Everett, Washington, directly involved with a big event in American labor history called the Everett Massacre, where members of the IWW sailed a boat up to the dock at Everett. They were going to get off and protest anti-union activity, and the businessmen and the local sheriff gathered at the dock armed and opened fire, killed six of the protesting workers, and at the helm of this whole operation was our former governor David Clough. So just keep that in mind when you go by his portrait here. So they're mostly governors, but there's other eminent people here, almost all men, who've been added in, like Ignatius Donnelly and various other people. So it's very much the elite that have their portraits up here, and kind of skews history in a certain direction without really saying so.
Now, can everybody hear us pretty well here? I was going to find a good place to talk about this. The stone that you see around you here is called Kasota limestone. And after the big controversy on the outside, they were pretty sure they were going to use Minnesota stone. And so this stone comes from quarries that are between St. Peter and Mankato, Minnesota. And it's sort of an interesting story. The quarries were founded by a guy named James Babcock, and then his son Charles Babcock had quarries with a guy named Wilcox, Babcock and Wilcox Quarries. And this stone, as you can see, is very warm. And Cass Gilbert wanted to use marble, but he saw this and he didn't want to get into the controversies of using foreign stone before, so he used this stuff. I'll pass this around. This is the 3 generations of Babcocks. The one in the middle owned the quarry when they took this stone. And this was the very first building where they actually polished the stone and used it in a major building. And it's been very, very popular ever since. Just as this building made the name of Cass Gilbert, this building really popularized this stone. It was used in the new Twin Stadium. It was used in the Museum of the American Indian in Washington, D.C., WCCO building, countless buildings all over Minnesota and the world. And I'll also pass around a couple photographs of the quarry so you can get some idea of what the quarries look like. You'll see the steam engines used there. And now that quarry, there was a guy from Germany, a stone cutter, named Bernard Vetter, who was working in the quarries around the time the Capitol was built. He first just had horses, but he had learned to be a stone cutter in Germany. He got horses, he built up some capital, and he and his sons eventually bought the quarry, and it's still operating now. The pit from which this stone came is now covered, but nearby quarries are still owned, and it's called Vetter Stone. And here's a copy. The guy holding the plans with a pipe is Bernard Vetter, and now his grandson, Howard Vetter, is the chairman of Vetter Stone, which is just north of Mankato, and is supplying the stone to buildings in Minnesota and the world. So this is a picture of him on the job site, and then a shot of him and his wife when they got married. So I'll just pass that around. So it's an interesting story about tenacity and stick-to-itiveness, because they went many years without even paying themselves a salary, and now they're really very successful providers of stone. Any questions? Yes?
I don't know if you said earlier, but how much did it cost to build the whole
Good
thing?
question. How much did it cost? The Capitol, they kept raising the price because it started being built during a depression, and wages went up between 50 and 100% by the end, and they had to keep appropriating more money, which gave Gilbert and the Capitol Commission some sleepless nights. But by the end, this whole building cost $4.5 million to build. It was finished in 1907. Can you imagine that? I mean, it's going to cost several $1 million just to restore the mortar and the stones, it's crazy. But you have to multiply that by 25 to get current dollars. So, any other questions? All right, so what we're going to do next is we're going to go up this cantilevered stairway, which is also very unusual at the time it was built. It was a very classy thing for Gilbert to do. And at the top is the entrance to the gallery of the House of Representatives, and we're going to tell the story of one guy who passed away there and a little bit about safety. So we'll just go up the steps. And I thought you could talk about the ratchet. we're about to go into the gallery of the house, and there are two things I wanted to talk about. One of them is you'll see a series of sculptures of a pioneer and a Native American, and those were done in 1938 by an Italian sculptor named Carlo Brioschi, and he moved here in 1909 and established a business with another guy named Minuti, and you can still see their studio half a block west of Victoria on University Avenue. There's a building there that's got all this decoration on it. They did a lot of sculpture. Carlo Brioschi was trained in Milan, and he also designed and championed the statue of Columbus, which is on the east side of the Capitol grounds, and his son, after he passed away, Amerigo, did the statue of Floyd B. Olson, where we were going to end the tour, but we're not because it's so crappy outside. But if you have a chance to look when it's nicer, or you're staunch and really excited by this tour, you can go see those two statues when we're done. But those are also Brioschi statues. The other unfortunate thing is that the chamber is also the site of one of the 5 deaths that we know about. And the last one, a particularly tragic one. John Corrigan was only 18 years old, and they were moving things back and forth over the gallery there, about a 30-foot drop, and they were only using a few planks. And he was young, just started the job, and we're assuming that he was worried about losing prestige or losing his job, and he was wheeling a very heavy wheelbarrow across just these 3 narrow planks. It tipped over, and rather than just let it go, he went with it. And he fell and died almost immediately. And his death triggered an investigation. The Attorney General got involved, and so did the head of the Commission for Labor and Industry, and his was the last death. So we're hoping, we're still trying to piece it together, but since there were articles in the newspaper and the Attorney General got involved, we're thinking that they may have stepped up their safety. But just to give you some idea, I'm going to pass around these photographs to show you what the safety conditions were like in those days. In 1903, the year that he died, there was about 1.13 workers for every 1,000 were killed in accidents in Minnesota. Today, we have only 1% of that level of accidents. Now they measure accidents in terms of 1 per 100,000. So our safety has increased, 100 times since then. And it's almost a miracle that only 6 people died here. You'll see no hard hats. You'll see steel workers with heavy objects, cement, stone over people's heads, no railings on the scaffolding. And perhaps the craziest thing is when this gets to you, there's a shot here of one of the derricks that they used. It's simply a log, the bark's still on it, and then they just nailed planks across it for people to go up and adjust the tops of the derrick. And then the second shot, which is from a similar derrick at the quarry in St. Cloud, where the stone from the base of the Capitol came, there's a guy up there. He's known as a roustabout. So just to give you an example of what the safety was like. And lastly, there's another shot here. If you look at this, there are these timbers in the inside here, and there's just a ladder just leaning against there. It makes me kind of shudder just to look at this thing. Let's start here. So the logistics of this are a little bit weird, but I thought it would be, if you haven't ever been to the House chamber, it's pretty amazing. So what I guess we will do is just file in there, notice those sculptures, and think about what it would be like to fall head first from the gallery down to where the House is in session. So we'll just file in and out as you wish, and then, yes?
Les and Vicki describe a little
Oh
bit.
yeah, you want to
Yeah.
talk some more?
Yeah, John Carrington was an interesting person. He was a very young man. He was an orphan whose parents had died several years earlier, and apparently he was taken in by family friends and lived and grew up in St. Paul and went to work at a very young age here on the project. and met with a very sad, terrible end at the end of it. I've got his autopsy record. It was the only one that we can find. It's the only physical description that we have of anybody that worked on the project and that was killed on it, and I'll pass it around for you to take a look at. We tried to find, he goes by at least 5 different names. It was his adopted family's name, his name, and all of them are misspelled, and we had a terrible, terrible time tracking him down because the name changes so much between records and newspaper articles, but we finally found him. We managed to reconstruct what little of his life that he had a chance to live, and we finally found his grave site too. The papers had it that he was buried in Mendota Heights. He's actually buried with his parents in Cherry Grove, Minnesota, and we're going to be going down there in the coming weeks to get a picture of his gravesite. So his was a very interesting story because of the name variations and because of the difficulties in tracking him down, but we did find him. So it was a very, very interesting process, long process.
Nobody would want to park here. Well, folks have pointed out one thing, that we do have horse selling state park on the other end of one of the runways that comes in by the street. But we also have the Nokomis Hiawatha Regional Park right at the end of one of those runways. And Representative Westbrook, I want you to know that the regional park of the parks in this state, that is the 5th highest one visited.
I'd like to introduce John Seeloff, who's been one of the researchers on the project, and
Well, I was going to talk about a carpenter that worked here, kind of a unique individual. His name was John Rakac. If there are any Czech speakers here, you could correct me on this, but R-A-C-H-A-C with a little V over the C. It's pronounced Rakac. He is unique because after the job was completed, he stayed on and worked for the state, so he probably worked here for 28 or 30 years. So he immigrated from Czechoslovakia, Bohemia at that time, now the Czech Republic, in 1863. He was 14 and he'd already completed 2 years of his carpenter apprenticeship at that time. Their family moved to New Prague at first, and then he got married when he was 20 years old and moved to St. Paul and was an independent carpenter, built buildings and additions down in the West 7th Street area. He was a prominent member of the CSPS hall that stands on Michigan and West 7th Street down there still. And his picture appears on a poster upstairs in the CSPS. This is him in the center. In the 1880s, he worked on his own, like I said, but in the 1890s, then he went to work for Butler Ryan, who became the contractor on this job. And on the early going here, it doesn't look like there would have been much carpentry involved, but the carpenters built all the scaffolding. They built all the false work for all these arches here. The arches had to be supported during the construction process. So he was probably working on that. And the other unique thing about him is that as he was working here, he had 2 sons who were working in Cass Gilbert's office. One of the sons quit the architecture. He was a draftsman and he became a steam fitter, but the other son, John Rakac Jr., became Cass Gilbert's partner, and Cass Gilbert moved to New York towards the end of the project, and John Jr., they were still living in the same house that John Rakac had built down in the West 7th Street area. The whole family lived there, and his son was drawing the plans up, and he was working here, executing them during the day. So this is a picture of Cass Gilbert's office, and or office workers. Cass Gilbert is in here, and I know that 2 of John Rakac's sons are in this picture. I can't identify them there, though. And the one son eventually moved to New York, changed his name to John Rockart, and became Cass Gilbert's really only partner. There was Cass Gilbert Jr., his son, and John Rockart. at that time, and they designed, prominent buildings all over the country. When Cass Gilbert died in the 1930s, they were working on the Supreme Court building in Washington, D.C., and John Rockart completed that job. And he died in about 1949 and got a nice obituary in the New York Times. But meanwhile, John Rockart Sr. was living here in St. Paul and coming to work here at the Capitol every day. His great-grandchildren, I guess, still have his toolbox that he used on the job. I don't know, are they here today? I invited them, but he has great-grandchildren that live in the area and also around the country. He had 11 children, so he has many descendants. He retired in 1926 at the age of 77. You can imagine, working here as a maintenance carpenter until you're 77. His obituary said he retired because of his injury to his leg, and as it turns out, he was hit by a car in 1915, and he got a serious leg injury. But he worked here for another 10 years before he retired, and then he eventually died in 1936. And he also got a nice obituary in the Pioneer Press here that we found. So.
Was he in the Carpenters Union?
Yeah, he joined the Carpenters Union in 1899, and I'm thinking that he joined it just because he was working on this job. Before that, like I say, he was a member of the CSPS. He got fraternal benefits through that, probably, and he was working on his own, so he probably didn't have a reason to join the Carpenters Union. But there was a 1899, 1900, there was a huge surge in union activity, and that's when he joined. And he was a member, while he worked here all the way till 1926 anyway. So.
As long as we're talking about wood, Randy and I had an opportunity last summer to go up where they're doing the rehab on the dome between the outer dome and the inner dome, and there's all kinds of crap laying around there, and including graffiti dating back to 1917 from maintenance people who worked up there. They put their name up in the year, and it runs up into the late 1970s, I think. There's a ladder laying around there that was a wooden ladder was constructed at the same time the dome was constructed, and apparently in use for decades after that. They'd hang it out over the edge and use it to walk out to change the light bulbs in the electrolier up there, 150 feet above the floor. And eventually, I think they found a safer method than that. But the ladder is still up there, just kind of tucked away in some dusty corner.
Yeah, it's 8 feet down. It just has a curve on it. It just hung over the edge of the railing, and people would climb down the 8 feet and reach out and change a light bulb. And well, anyway, I'd like to just mention also about unions. Walter and William Butler, who founded the primary contractor for this building, the Butler brothers, were originally bricklayers who founded Local 1 of the Bricklayers Union, and they were blacklisted for their activity. But they went on to become, contractors, live on Summit. Both of them lived on Summit Avenue. And so most of the people that worked for them, as far as we can tell, were union members. So as far as we can tell, people looking at records and so forth, most of the workmen here were union members. So. Well, okay, now what we're going to do is we're going to just make a circle back to the elevator in the far corner. And you might just, again, if you missed my saying it, these columns, these aren't weight-supporting columns, they're plastic with a Minnesota lady slipper. And at the far end, you'll see most of the larger murals here were done on canvas and then put in with lead. But those two, I think, are actually frescoes that were done on scaffolds in place. So we're gonna go around and do the elevator on the far left. Not this one, but the one to our left.
And go how far?
And we're going all the way down to the basement, not the ground floor. We're going to the Rathskeller now. As you're coming, this is Winona limestone. It's painted here, but if you notice by the vending machines, there is some restored limestone. You can see what the stone itself looks like. And above us are Gustavino tiles, which are fireproof and were specially developed for use in vaults. And those same kind of tiles line the inside of the outer dome. They were developed by a Spaniard who was an associate of Cass Gilbert. Big innovation for both fireproofing and for structural strength. So we're going to talk about a few things and end the tour here because I'm guessing people parked all over. And originally we were going to go through here and then stand out in the parking lot where the stone shed used to be, but it didn't seem like a good idea. So a couple things. One reason that we wanted to come down here is if you notice these German sayings, Cass Gilbert really admired the Rathskellers, which were typical of city halls in Germany. And the largest group in Minnesota were Germans. There were many, many people who had been born in Germany who lived here. We don't have a clear census of the workers because they don't always say where they were born, but we know of the 5 men who died here. 3 of them were from either Sweden or Germany, and a lot of the stonecutters whose families have come to us were German. And still Germans are the largest ethnic group in Minnesota today. So these sayings, I'll pass around. I've got the original German and then the English translations, but a lot of them have to do with drinking and merrymaking and so forth, as you'll see. And just to give you some idea about immigrants and the shifting feelings about them, Dave was saying how resident aliens used to be able to vote. Well, of course, when they put this Rathskeller in, there was a lot of respect for the portion of the population that was German. But during World War I, suddenly German and those things connected with the country weren't so popular, and these sayings were painted over. And then some of them were restored again, but then Prohibition came in, and they changed some of what these sayings said to, instead of saying, eat, drink, and be merry, or something like that, they changed it to, good drinking, good food is good for the spirit, you know, very generic stuff. So, and then this was restored back in the 1980s, I believe. If you want to know details, since we're actually have a different focus, there's considerable detail in that mural that you can look at later that explains that there were something like 20 or 30 layers of paint on here. But again, as far as we can tell, the majority of people that worked on building this Capitol actually came from outside of Minnesota, and most of them, we think, from other countries originally. We're going to go out now to the site of the shed, which is in the northwest corner, but we're going to talk about it in here. And Vicki Woodcock, one of the primary researchers of the project, found out a lot about one of the people who was killed in that shed. What's this over here?
The very first person who was killed in the shed on the grounds here was a young man named Felix Arthur. And he was born in Pickens County, Georgia, where the marble for the exterior came from. And when that contract was authorized and the marble was cut, Felix and a group of other men, marble polishers, stonemasons, came up here from Georgia to work on the marble. He was a young man, he was 23 years old, and the marble shed that was out on the grounds, it's not there anymore, and we can't really find any evidence of it anymore, was a great big barn-like structure with great big belts that ran through it. There was a steam engine that ran all of these belts that ran the polishers that polished the marble, and that's what he did for a living. He was out there. He was killed early in the morning. He had, I guess, had just been at work an hour or two when he was caught in one of the belts and was badly, badly injured. He was crushed. He was taken to City Hospital, which is, I think, the forerunner of Regents Hospital, just right over there in the area where Regents is now, and he died the next day. His remains were embalmed and casketed and taken back to Georgia for burial to his family. And his family was just terribly, terribly distraught about this. He had a number of younger siblings and 2 parents who were in their 40s. They were a very young family, and they were so upset and so distraught by his death. They sold everything and left. And they had other family who had moved to Central Texas after Civil War, and they moved there too. And if you look in that area, look at phone books now, there are a lot of Arthur family descendants, lots of folks with that surname in that area, and I imagine probably some of his siblings have got descendants that are living there now too. Randy also mentioned that a lot of the people that worked on the building were from foreign countries, and two of the other men who died here, Florian Zauner was one, and Alfred Swanson was the other, were from Europe. They were German-Austrian stonecutters. Swanson was a young man. He was in his late 20s. Came here in the mid-1890s with a brother. Immigrated with a brother. I don't know the whereabouts of his other family, but he came here, lived here for several years, was working on stone projects and as kind of day labor. Zauner was older. He was born in the 1860s and immigrated here in the late 1880s, I believe, and was a laborer and also a stonecutter too. What's interesting is that there were a lot of immigrants, like Randy said, living in St. Paul, lots of German immigrants, and they tended to congregate in neighborhoods. And we found out from census records that they also tended to congregate in boarding houses together. You find a boarding house that was run by, Zauner lived in a large boarding house with 15 other people, and the man that owned it was a German shoemaker. And we've seen that repeatedly over and over with some of the people that worked on the buildings. But Zauner had no family. He was 40 years old at the time he died. He didn't speak English. And this was probably his extended family. I often wondered if this was just like his extended family that lived with him in this boarding house and conversed with him. And that was basically probably his social world, was that people in that boarding house were in his immediate area. And I've often wondered if his inability to speak English affected his death. He probably couldn't understand instructions given to him very easily. And he was the man that fell with the other man off the scaffolding, hit a beam on the way down. It severed his arm at the shoulder, and he hit the floor and was dead. They found him a couple seconds later in a big pool of blood and dead. So these men met with really terrible accidents and really severe endings, and all of them but Vernon Cole died. Vernon Cole did live, and as I said, he recovered sufficiently that we found a World War I draft card. He was cleared for military conscription, so he survived a broken skull, a broken neck, broken ribs, and numerous internal injuries, and went on and married, worked as a clerk in the Department of Agriculture, and died in 1950, and is buried with his parents in Lakewood Cemetery over in Minneapolis. So it's been a real interesting journey looking at these men and trying to piece together their lives and looking through census records and finding out who they were and who they lived with and how they died.
As I said, the stone shed where the first death of Felix Arthur that Vicki told us about happened would have been just over in this corner, on the northwest corner of the Capitol, and I passed around one picture that shows that shed. It's kind of in a L shape. That's the way they do it. They'd have the stone in the middle and a hoist, and then they'd distribute it around. So another thing that the architect, Ginny Lakovic, who has been supervising the restoration of the dome, told me that every single piece of exterior stone in this Capitol was hand-worked and very subtly sloped to repel water. And as I showed you, the marble has been eroding, especially because of the atmosphere here. But she said it wouldn't have lasted as well as it had they not taken the care to slope every single surface so that water would run off of it and so forth. I'm going to pass around a few other pictures. The butlers devised a special tool, a special lathe for putting the flutes in the columns so that they wouldn't be damaged in transport. They'd get rid of as much stone as possible because it was very expensive, to ship the stone. So it would be roughed out for the granite up in Cold Spring and St. Cloud, and then for the limestone down in Kasota, but then it would be shipped by rail, but the finishing work was done in that shed, or actually on site. You'll see a shot of somebody just using hand tools up on the roof. So they actually worked on it even in place. Most of the statues that you see, like the ones in the front I showed you of the Virtues, were done off-site. But the eagles, which you'll take note of them when you go out, and I'll pass out a picture of one being hoisted, those were done on site. The stonecutters used calipers and points, and they could take a model like the one you'll see here with Daniel Chester French, who designed a lot of the sculptures. They could take something like, as you'll see, this is the model he did of the Lincoln Memorial, and they could make it 10 times bigger or whatever. They were incredible craftsmen. It usually took 10 years or more to learn how to do this. But these are the people who did it. But unfortunately, the firm, Purdy and Hutchinson, was out of Chicago, and we don't have the names of any of these guys so far. So hopefully in the next stage of the project, we'll get some money and maybe get to go to New York and go to Chicago, where some of the records, and we can identify more people like Vicki and John and Dave have done so far. So I'll pass these around just to give you some idea about what the stonecutters were doing. And I've also passed around a couple payroll records I just thought would be interesting for you. So that's the end of the formal part of the tour. We'll certainly stick around for